In the summer of 1879, a scientist in Paris was studying a disease that was wiping out chicken flocks across France. According to the story often told about this discovery, a batch of infected bacteria was left sitting out for weeks, possibly forgotten during a long vacation. When it was tested anyway, on a hunch, the results were strange. The chickens injected with the old, weakened bacteria only got mildly sick. Then they recovered, and when they were later exposed to the full, deadly strain of the disease, they didn't die. They didn't even get sick. Whatever exactly happened in that lab, the outcome pointed to something remarkable. That scientist may not have realized it right away, but he had stumbled onto one of the most important discoveries in the history of medicine. We'll come back to him later because his forgotten batch of chicken bacteria would go on to save hundreds of millions of human lives. But to understand how a small, nervous bird ended up at the center of that discovery, we have to go back much further than 1879. Before we get there, if hidden history like this is your thing, hit like right now and subscribe, because Origin Tales is about to take a bird you've never thought twice about and show you how it quietly shaped the entire world. Possibly around 8,000 years ago, in the humid jungles of what is now Thailand and southern China, a small red bird moved through the undergrowth in quick, nervous bursts. It startled easily. It could barely fly more than a few feet. This was the red jungle fowl, and by every measure, it looked like a terrible candidate to become the most successful bird on the planet. Imagine a small farming family living near a river in that region. The rains have been unpredictable this year. The rice harvest is thin. Hunting has come up empty for days. Then someone in the family notices wild jungle fowl gathering at the edge of their fields, drawn in by spilled grain. At first, the family barely notices them back. Then, slowly, someone starts leaving out extra seed on purpose. Generation after generation, the calmest birds stay closest to people. The nervous ones scatter and disappear into the forest. Nobody signs a contract. Nobody names a discovery. Over hundreds of years, without anyone fully realizing it, a wild forest bird becomes something new, a farm animal. But here's a detail that surprises most people. For nearly 2,000 years after domestication began, chickens were rarely raised primarily for meat. So what were they for? In ancient China, Persia, Greece, and Rome, chickens became something closer to entertainment, status, and religion. Roosters fought roosters in front of crowds who bet fortunes on the outcome. Kings and nobles bred prized fighting birds the way later generations would prize racehorses, sometimes paying more for a single rooster than a farmer might earn in a year. A bird that had started life as forest prey was now a symbol of wealth and power, and in Rome, someone came up with an even stranger use for them. Roman commanders traveled with cages of sacred chickens before major military campaigns. Before a battle, a priest would open the cage and offer grain. If the chickens ate eagerly, the gods favored victory. If they refused, the mission could be delayed or canceled entirely. In 249 BC, a Roman general named Publius Claudius Pulcher was preparing for a major naval battle near Sicily. His priests brought out the sacred chickens. The birds refused to eat. His officers grew nervous. Pulcher did not. Furious and impatient, Pulcher ordered the chickens thrown overboard into the sea. According to the story passed down through Roman historians, he said, "If they won't eat, let them drink." Then he launched his fleet anyway. The battle that followed, known as the Battle of Drepana, became one of the worst naval defeats in Roman history. Dozens of ships were destroyed. Pulcher was recalled to Rome in disgrace. Whether or not you believe the omens meant anything, one thing is certain. A small, ordinary bird had become powerful enough to end a general's career. But this was only the beginning of the chicken's strange political influence. As trade routes stretched across Asia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, chickens traveled with merchants and soldiers. They needed no pasture. They fit in a basket, and unlike almost any other traveling cargo, they kept producing food along the way in the form of eggs. Long before Rome, though, another civilization had already pushed this bird toward something far more advanced, and almost nobody talks about it today. Along the banks of the Nile in ancient Egypt, farmers faced a simple problem. A hen can only sit on so many eggs at once. If you wanted thousands of chicks, nature alone couldn't deliver them fast enough. So Egyptian farmers built something extraordinary. Imagine stepping into a large, dark mud brick building. It's warm, almost uncomfortably warm, and the air smells of ash and feathers. Along the walls, thousands of eggs sit in careful rows. Workers move quietly between them, feeding small fires, adjusting vents, and checking the warmth of the air with nothing but their bare hands. There were no thermometers, no digital sensors, just human instinct, built from years of quiet, repeated failure and correction. If the temperature drifted even slightly, entire batches could die inside their shells. This was one of the most advanced pieces of applied biology in the ancient world, and it was kept as a closely guarded secret, passed down through specific families for generations. Picture the responsibility resting on a single hatchery worker's shoulders. Thousands of future chickens, an entire village's food supply, depending on how carefully she managed a small fire through the night. If she got it wrong, families would go hungry for months. We don't know her name. History rarely recorded names like hers. But without workers exactly like her, entire regions of the ancient world may never have had a reliable food source at all. That secret method of hatching eggs by the thousands eventually spread outward, imperfectly, along the very same trade routes carrying the birds themselves. And every time chickens crossed into a new culture, they picked up a new purpose. In parts of ancient India, some communities saw them as sacred and refused to eat them at all. In medieval Europe, chickens became a form of currency. Peasants paid rent to landlords not in coins, but in hens and eggs, because a self-renewing food source was often worth more than money that could lose its value overnight. But the real surprise came when chickens left dry land completely. When European sailors began crossing oceans in the 1500s and 1600s, chickens went with them. Imagine opening the hold of a wooden ship after 6 weeks at sea. The smell hits you first, then the sound. Dozens of chickens crowded into cramped wooden crates, feathers everywhere, exhausted but alive. Picture a young sailor on one of those voyages, weeks from any coastline, rationing his last dried biscuit. What keeps him going isn't the ship's stored grain. It's a small, warm egg laid that morning by a hen that had never asked to cross an ocean either. For that sailor, a surviving chicken flock could mean the difference between reaching land and going hungry at sea. Scurvy and starvation killed sailors by the thousands on long voyages. Chicken eggs didn't cure scurvy, but laid steadily, even in those cramped, swaying holds. They gave crews a reliable source of fresh protein and nutrition at a time when almost nothing else on board could offer that. A small, frightened jungle bird had quietly become one of the reasons entire continents got mapped by outsiders for the first time. Think about that contrast for a moment. A creature that could barely fly a few feet off the ground had somehow become essential to crossing the largest oceans on Earth. And the story gets even stranger from here. Some researchers studying ancient chicken bones found in South America believe Polynesian sailors may have reached the continent long before European explorers ever did, navigating vast stretches of open ocean using nothing but stars, currents, and memorized wave patterns. If they're right, chickens may have helped rewrite the timeline of human migration across the entire Pacific. For most of history after that, chickens stayed relatively small and slow to grow. A chicken in the 1800s barely resembled the chicken most people picture today. Meat was still considered a luxury. Eggs mattered far more than meat did, because a living hen laying eggs day after day was often more valuable than a single meal. Then, in 1923, everything started to shift. A woman in Delaware named Cecile Steele placed an order for 50 baby chicks. By mistake, the hatchery sent her 500. Instead of returning them, she decided to raise the extra birds specifically for meat instead of eggs. It worked. It worked so well that within a few years, her accidental experiment had grown into a full-blown meat industry, and other farmers across the region rushed to copy her. But it would take one more historical accident to truly transform the chicken forever, and it happened during the darkest years of the Second World War. Meat was tightly rationed across the United States and much of Europe. Beef and pork were reserved largely for soldiers overseas. Chicken, though, wasn't rationed the same way, mostly because it wasn't seen as serious food yet. Imagine a family backyard during those years. Children collecting warm eggs each morning before school, careful not to crack a single one, because every egg mattered now. Parents building small wooden coops from spare lumber because government campaigns were actively encouraging ordinary citizens to raise their own hens as a patriotic duty. For millions of families, chicken stopped being an occasional treat and became something they depended on every single week. When the war ended, many families kept their flocks. A taste for chicken born out of wartime scarcity quietly became a long-term habit, and that habit set the stage for what came next. In the following years, a major American retail chain sponsored a national competition with a simple, ambitious goal: breed a chicken that grows bigger, faster, and meatier than any bird before it. Scientists and farmers across the country entered, racing to engineer what became known as the chicken of tomorrow. The prize was won, and the bird that resulted from that competition changed everything. This new chicken grew almost twice as fast as its ancestors. It reached market weight in weeks instead of months. Almost overnight, chicken went from an occasional luxury to one of the cheapest sources of protein most families could buy. But that transformation came with a cost most people never saw. As farms scaled up to keep pace, small family operations struggled to compete. Picture a farmer who had raised chickens the same way his father and grandfather had, feeding small flocks by hand, knowing every bird individually, walking the same dirt paths between the same wooden coops his family had used for decades. Now he was competing against massive operations raising tens of thousands of birds at once at a fraction of the cost per pound. He couldn't match those prices. No amount of hard work could close that gap because the gap wasn't about effort anymore. It was about scale, machinery, and capital he simply didn't have. Many small farmers in his position sold their land, took jobs in town, or signed contracts with the very corporations that had put them out of business, becoming employees on farms their families used to own outright. Many small farmers couldn't survive that shift. Entire rural communities that had depended on small-scale poultry farming for generations were reshaped within a single lifetime. What felt like simple progress on paper meant real loss for real families on the ground, and the bird itself paid a price too. Bred so aggressively for size and speed, some modern broiler chickens grow so large, so fast, that their legs can barely support their own weight. It's an uncomfortable truth behind a food many of us eat without a second thought. Here's a question worth sitting with. Knowing what it took to make chicken this cheap and this common, does that change how you think about the bird on your plate? Let us know in the comments, because there isn't one simple answer here. Now remember that scientist from 1879 with his forgotten batch of bacteria and his accidentally immune chickens? That scientist was Louis Pasteur, and that experiment became one of the founding moments of modern vaccination. Pasteur realized that a weakened version of a disease could train the body to fight off the real thing without ever causing the full illness. It's the same basic principle behind vaccines used against countless diseases today. And chickens didn't just help discover that principle. Their eggs became essential to actually producing vaccines for decades afterward. Scientists found that chicken eggs were remarkably effective environments for growing certain viruses safely, including strains used in early flu vaccines that went on to protect millions of people worldwide. A bird once used to predict the outcome of battles ended up helping protect humanity from invisible threats no army could ever fight directly. But scale always comes with risk. As chicken farming expanded into nearly every country on Earth, avian influenza became a serious concern. Dense poultry populations allowed the virus to spread rapidly, sometimes forcing farmers to cull millions of birds at once to prevent wider outbreaks. The same density that made chicken meat cheap and abundant also created new vulnerabilities, tying our most industrialized systems back to the unpredictable rhythms of nature. Today, chicken has become one of the most widely consumed meats on the planet, valued for requiring far less land and water than raising cattle. That efficiency is part of why many researchers see it as an increasingly important protein source for a growing global population. Think about the scale of that shift. A bird once kept mostly for its eggs, mostly by small farming families, is now processed by the billions every single year to feed a planet of 8 billion people. And the next transformation may already be underway. In labs across the world, scientists are now growing real chicken muscle cells in steel bioreactors without ever hatching, feeding, or slaughtering an actual bird. Some countries have already approved this lab-grown chicken for sale in restaurants. Companies are racing to bring the cost down enough to compete with traditional farming. If this technology succeeds at scale, we may be standing at the edge of a shift just as significant as the one that began in Cecile Steele's backyard or in that warm Egyptian hatchery thousands of years earlier. A bird domesticated by accident may end up being undomesticated by design, its meat produced without the animal ever existing at all. Think about the full distance this story has traveled. A frightened forest bird that could barely fly, tamed almost by accident, used for centuries not as food but as a battlefield oracle, carried across oceans by sailors who depended on it just to survive, re-engineered in a single generation into an entirely new biological shape, turned into one of science's most important tools. And now, standing at the edge of being reinvented all over again, this time inside a laboratory instead of a barnyard. Some scientists studying the deep future of our planet have made a striking prediction. Long after our smartphones have corroded into dust and our buildings have crumbled into unrecognizable rubble, one thing may still remain buried in the layers of the earth in staggering numbers: chicken bones. Billions of them, discarded year after year, so biologically distinct from their wild ancestors that they may become one of the clearest physical markers of the entire industrial age. A future civilization digging through this planet's soil might uncover, of all things, the bones of a small, nervous jungle bird and realize that it was quietly at the center of everything we built. We rarely think twice about the chicken, its background noise in daily life. Dinner, an ingredient, something so common we've stopped seeing it as remarkable at all. But maybe that's exactly the point of this story. The biggest forces shaping human history aren't always the ones we remember from textbooks. Sometimes they're small, quiet, feathered, sitting in the corner of a farm, easy to overlook until you realize it's been changing everything the entire time. If this story changed the way you look at something you thought you already understood, that's exactly what Origin Tales is here for. Tell us in the comments what surprised you the most. Hit like if you made it this far and subscribe, because the next hidden history we uncover might just do this all over again.